Hello. You're probably wondering how I'm talking to you through the vessel of this grumpy looking video game tiger. Well, the answer is quite simple really. I hacked the game. In other words, I cheated. Though, would cheated really be the appropriate word to use in this scenario? Almost every common definition of cheating you can find will refer to it as an external means of gaining an unfair advantage. I'd posit that the only advantage I've gained from taking on this far furrier and more adorable form is that I'm probably about 5% more endearing to listen to. But look! Now I'm this wardrobe. Wow. How does he do it? Well, regardless of how minor the advantage is that I'm gaining from these very real in-game hacks that are most certainly not just sly video editing tricks, the fact of the matter is I wanted to achieve something that was not possible within the rules of the game I'm playing, so I used external means to achieve my goal. By almost every definition of the word, that is cheating. And yet, it's probably not the kind of thing you think of when you think of the word cheating, right? You think of people trying to get a peek at your hand in a game of cards, steroid and drug scandals in sports, Chloe getting with that other dude right in front of you at Jason's house party. I'm sorry, I really don't know why I brought that up. I want you to know that I'm here for you. Here's what I'm getting at. Most cheating is bad. However, in video games specifically, there's a lot more room for shades of grey, and this is for a few reasons. One, because video games as a medium are so unlike anything else in the world, but also because cheating has actually become a hugely important part of the identity of video games, especially in the past few years. Here's an important disclaimer. Almost nothing you learn in this video, if you learn anything from it, will ever be useful in your everyday life in any way whatsoever. It may, however, occasionally stand a decent chance at being a tad bit interesting, so I hope it's worth it. And I will continue with this video as soon as I'm finished reading this letter. Huh. It says here it's time to look into things. Sure, I can do that. I can do it too much. There's a lot of videos out there on the internet that are called insert abstract concept here in video games, and I often find them to be very general and non-specific. Hell, I've done it myself. I regret it. And in direct response to that, and because I couldn't for the life of me think of a better potential title for this video is going to get markedly too specific. It's going to get disgustingly specific. Look how far I'm zooming in. Holy shit. It's 1980. Game designers are not yet the boozing, coke-snorting rock stars they'd become in the modern era. Despite the fact that video games are slowly entering the public consciousness, only the most fanatic actually know the names of the designers and developers. The fame is generally reserved for the publishers. So eventually this one guy called Warren Robinette goes, well, that's a bit fucked, isn't it, mate? And he sneaks his name into his own game without the publishers knowing. It's incredibly well hidden, and players are only likely to discover it by accidentally or coincidentally clicking frantically until they obtain a key that opens a hidden chamber with his name in it. This is often referred to as the first Easter egg. Question: have you ever lied to someone? Yes, you fucking have. Don't lie to me. When you've done so, especially to someone like your parents, have they said something along the lines of, well, now that you've lied to me once, I don't know how I can trust you again. That's kind of what happens to video games here, only it's a lot more fun. The floodgates are opened. How many more dudes have hidden their names in these games in glowing text? Secrets become a staple of video games, and as time goes on and games progress, developers recognize the inherent appeal of secret shit that players can brag about finding to all their friends. Now, I want to take a brief pause here and say that it's a very niche piece of writing, and it's very unlikely that you've read it, but a lot of this video, especially the early goings, are heavily inspired by this essay written by Jean-Christophe Geiger, and this guy. It's called Cheating in Video Games, Causes and Some Consequences. I bring this up because, one, I don't want to seem like I'm plagiarizing. I am going to run a bit further with some of the ideas they present in this essay and use them to present some of my own ideas later on, but also currently it's all historical so far and I can't really say anything they haven't already said. I'm just trying to put it into my own words. I also say this because there are some fucking excellent quotes in this essay that I'm going to refer to throughout the video. I'm going to drop a link to a downloadable PDF of the essay in the description of this video if you want to read it yourself. I obviously honestly think it's great, but it is also 20 pages long, so, you know. So as a knock-on effect of the revolution that the first Easter egg starts, the essay talks about Space Invaders, and it says here, the arcade game was so popular that it is believed to have caused a temporary shortage of 100 yen coin in Japan. Urban legends say that fans tried to acquire them at any price, just to throw them into the machine and play another round of fighting alien invaders. I only leave that part in because it's fascinating, though I can't say for sure how true it is. Here's the part that really matters. Additionally, holding down the reset button while turning on the game allowed for double shooting, which is a huge advantage. Other games included similar advantages. Usually it was enough to press the appropriate key combination while loading, or sometimes during the game, to get an extra life or other special powers. Very shortly prior to this section, the essay also says, the Easter eggs themselves evolved in a way directly associated with cheating. And here now is where we get into definitions of cheating. This Space Invaders exploit is still very much in the game, but it does present players with a huge advantage that not everyone is going to be aware of. Another example would be the Konami code, a series of seemingly random inputs that can be performed in a number of Konami games for extra lives and the like. So if we're running with this definition that cheating is using something external to gain an advantage, does it really apply here to some of the most famous video game cheats in history, to basically any cheat code? The question becomes, are exploits and cheating the same thing? Or is in fact the process of learning about these exploits in the first place through external means the actual cheating? I don't think it'd be fair to say that the first people who found Warren Robinette's name in Adventure were cheating. They found it via happenstance. Were the people who then found it intentionally with prior knowledge of its existence cheating? This is a bit of a weird example because finding his name was hardly an advantage, but it is still something they wanted to achieve, so I'm sure you can at least see my point. Originally, secrets in video games were just spread through word of mouth, but then came print. An entire subsection of the print industry pops up. Not content with telling us what shoes Leonardo DiCaprio has been wearing this week, now they're telling us how to unlock the Star Roads in Super Mario World 2. Guidebooks and magazines full of tips, tricks and exploits, sometimes simply referred to as cheat books. This is stuff like Prima Strategy Guides and Nintendo Power and so on. This is a decade or so later, but as a kid growing up in the early 2000s, I had a little flipbook-sized Nintendo cheat book with all sorts of info about Pokemon Crystal and Super Smash Bros. Melee and the like, which were two of Nintendo's big in properties at the time. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but I've been scouring the internet trying to find the exact one since. I don't think it came from like a big known brand, and sadly I've had no luck. But it had every character in Melee listed alongside their unlock requirements, as well as all their moves and their moves' canonical names. It's because of this book that I know that Dr. Mario's down throw in Super Smash Bros. Melee is canonically named the Hospital Bed, for which I am eternally grateful. If by some miracle any fellow Brits can happen to track down the exact book I'm talking about, it might cause me to have an actual orgasm of nostalgia. I think the front cover was blue, but I might be crazy. It's easy to forget in these modern times, but once upon a time these books were very much considered cheating. Some people would still define them and things like online walkthroughs and video guides which have effectively succeeded them as cheating. This is also a tendency more casual players tend to have. Have you ever played a game with a relative and there's a puzzle in it and neither of you can solve it, and eventually you're like, nope, I give up, let's Google it or something, and they're like, don't you dare. There is certainly a debate to be had as to whether or not such a thing is cheating at the very least, but I'm a big believer in the code is law philosophy. Throughout the aforementioned essay, the authors, a pair of Polish academics, reference the works and studies of one Mia Consalvo numerous times. Mia Consalvo is an American professor of communication studies and the author of a whole bunch of books and publications on the topic of video games and the culture surrounding them in modern society. She posits that players look at cheating in three different ways. Purists are pretty much the ones we just described. They're the ones who would be opposed to even reading a walkthrough and want to complete a game based entirely on their own knowledge. On the other side of that spectrum are the savage cheaters, truly the gun-toting outlaws of the wild western frontier that is #gaming. They believe that nothing is off the table, from aimbots to lag switches to something else we're going to talk about in just a minute. Some even believe that hacking into a game is a way of improving and purifying its code, which, has the potential to be a bit less diabolical than it sounds, actually. Again, we'll get there. And sitting right in the middle are those who believe that code is law. Basically, anything that's within the game's code is fair game. Where does this leave walkthroughs and cheat books? I don't know. I think that can vary even between people who believe that code is law, because cheating in games is a very complicated thing to define. The code is law philosophy goes back to what I was saying earlier about exploits. Are exploits cheating? If they're in the code, I don't think so. I think using them against a casual player who doesn't know how to use them and doesn't want to use them is obviously a bit of a dick move, but man, exploits have given birth to some of the most beautiful game design ever, especially in a competitive sense. Strafe jumping and rocket jumping are two mechanics that came about in Quake due to bugs in the game's code, with the former allowing you to literally break the game's intended speed cap. Competitive Super Smash Bros. Melee is almost entirely made up of glitches and exploits that formed advanced techniques. Almost nothing you see players doing to each other is intended by the developers. Melee is also one of the most enduring competitive fighting games ever made, and still has a gargantuan competitive scene today, 2 decades later, even if that's really not what Nintendo wanted. I suppose this poses the question of developer intentions. None of the things I just mentioned were developer intended, so how did the respective companies behind these games respond to their players' discoveries? Well, if you ask me, said companies, being Nintendo and Valve, sit at quite literally the exact opposite ends of the spectrum as far as being okay with exploits / cheating, if you ask some people go. Valve looked at rocket jumping, strafe jumping and all kinds of other crazy stuff in Quake and went, whoa, can we get fries with that? And implemented them as actual mechanics in every subsequent Quake game. Cut, wait, hold on. Valve did not make Quake, id Software did. As you're going to see over the next couple of minutes of this video, I was very much in Valve mode and I completely overlooked this detail. Annoyingly, in the back of my head, I totally knew that id Software made Quake because I just recently watched Liam Triforce's excellent video on Quake that I'm going to drop in the description, but I think I was just on a roll with audio recording and I didn't stop to think. Thankfully, this little mishap doesn't intrude with the key premise of the video or any of the points I'm about to make, but I thought it was worth correcting myself anyway. Valve did create the source engine from the Gold Source engine, which itself originates from a heavily modded version of the engine John Carmack made for Quake, and I think it'd still be fair to say that both Valve and id Software looked at rocket jumping and other things in Quake and said, whoa, can we get fries with that? Considering that id did implement such things in every subsequent Quake game, and because of something else that I'm about to say in just a minute. Also, I referred to the authors of the essay about cheating as a pair of Polish academics earlier, but in fact only one of them, the man whose name I really cannot pronounce, is Polish. Jean-Christophe is in fact Portuguese. My lecturer told me they were both Polish, and clearly I made a very foolish mistake in taking his word for it. I've decided to take down and re-upload this video in order to amend this information and put this little disclaimer in, which is really going to mess with my metrics and put a huge damper on the video's potential for success, so I really hate doing call to action shit like this, especially in the middle of a video, but considering that I don't do it at the end of this video, I guess it's just worth saying that I would really appreciate your likes and comments, and especially sharing the video around if you like it and all that stuff more than ever, because it would be really huge for giving this video a decent second chance. So yeah, seriously, thank you very much if you do that. You look lovely today. Nintendo saw dash dancing, wave dashing and L cancelling in Super Smash Bros. Melee and said, hello, yes, I'd like to speak to the manager please. After Quake, rocket jumping also found its way into Team Fortress 2 as a developer-intended mechanic and an integral part of the class identity of both the soldier and the demo man. It's a frankly amazing mechanic in my opinion that gives both classes some much needed depth and extra mobility, significantly raising their skill ceilings and allowing for some seriously cool plays. Fun fact, Team Fortress 2 is still the best designed first-person shooter ever made. Doom 2016 comes close, Overwatch does not. Sorry Overwatch fans, you're not welcome in this video. Maybe China will take you. Team Fortress 2 is also a great excuse to talk about soft cheating and hard cheating. If soft cheating is the kind of stuff us code is law people are okay with, exploits and the like, then hard cheating is something a little bit like the bot infestation the game has been struggling with for what feels like forever. Valve seem okay with soft cheating or exploits like rocket jumping, but they seem to recognize the bots as a serious problem and are trying to clamp down on them by doing stuff like making new accounts unable to type in chat and using VAC or Valve anti-cheat to prevent players with aimbots and similar things from entering public lobbies. In direct response to the exploits that forged Super Smash Bros. Melee's competitive integrity, Nintendo on the other hand made Brawl, a game seemingly designed to be anti-competitive. Players could literally trip over at any point they were moving, meaning dash dancing was a non-option. The game's physics were made floaty, hit stun was adjusted, and combos were practically deleted from the game. They also tried to shut down the Melee event at EVO 2013, and series director Masahiro Sakurai has generally voiced apathy towards the idea of competitive Smash. You might ask yourself, why would they intentionally go out of their way to try and marginalize the competitive community? Because it's Nintendo, and you're going to play how they want. I don't mean to make them out like the villain though. The games are their properties and they have the right to lord over them however they want. Nowadays we live in the era of Smash Ultimate, a game in which Sakurai and the design team are clearly doing their damnedest to redeem themselves and do right by the competitive community by bringing back a lot of mechanics from Melee into Ultimate. Unfortunately, I believe they're doing so without really wanting to look into what made Melee so good, and thus their counterpart mechanics like dash dancing and directional air dodging really just don't work the same, and the game is a bit of a mess of design, and hey, here's this video. Interestingly, seemingly because of Nintendo's neglect of the competitive Melee scene however, it's through looking at Melee that we can find a far more positive representation of hard cheating. The community support for Melee is insane. They've created training mod packs with visual hitboxes and parameters and all manner of ways to practice the game more effectively than in the game itself. They've created netplay, and if you want to see just how deep the rabbit hole goes, look up Melee's Project Slippi. Akshon Esports has a really great video on it that I will link in the description. All of these things absolutely fit the criteria for hard cheating. It's changing the game's code to provide players with advantages, but in my opinion it's amazing, it's beautiful. The community have allowed the game to thrive when the developers won't. Those who don't want to get multi-shied don't have to. Nobody gets hurt. It's all mutually beneficial. Made by the competitive community and for the competitive community. On the subject of mod packs, we go back to Valve, who in their typically liberal fashion have pioneered user-generated content through Steam. Countless games on Steam have easily accessible mods, extra pieces of content and upgrades to the game's code made by players. Extra content isn't really relevant to this video, but there's tons of mods out there that could be considered hard cheating, from simple quality of life changes to modified difficulty, extra equipment, and even changes made for the sake of accessibility. All things outside of the original game's code made with the player's benefit in mind. While you can argue the specifics all you want, I think it's very hard to argue that Steam's modding system and community is not conceptually a very positive example of hard cheating. Hard cheating, however, is certainly more subject to be degenerate and unfair, especially in multiplayer games. At least in single player games you're not hurting anyone else, but stuff like aimbots and wall hacks like we mentioned in Team Fortress 2 just completely spoil the fun for everyone. Some of the more prototypical examples of hard cheating show up in the form of GameShark, Action Replay and Game Genie and whatnot. These devices mostly worked with single player games, so at least they weren't as egregious as our prior example, but they still stirred up their fair share of controversy. To again quote Jean-Christophe and our other friend, who are again referencing Mia Consalvo, Consalvo in 2007 mentions charges posed by Nintendo towards Galoob. That name is just, well, I genuinely wish I was called Galoob. After issuing their Game Genie hardware add-on, Nintendo accused Galoob, so I'm having way too much fun with this, of spoiling the market and shortening the lives of their games by making them too easy. According to Nintendo lawyers, Game Genie allowed players to complete games too fast, which in consequence lowered their satisfaction with the game. But research proved something opposite. Applying devices of that kind both increases game satisfaction and extends its life. Advanced and skilled players first go through the game without any hardware aid, and then come back to experience it again in a totally new form, or simply skip the boring parts that they would otherwise have to pass again. It would scare off many for sure. The much more numerous group of casual or very young players, thanks to hardware add-ons, can enjoy a game that would otherwise be too hard for them. Increasing complexity of games leads to a situation in which only professionals can use some features. Therefore, hardware cheats extend a game's life and also include casual players that, without cheating, would get frustrated with endless attempts to pass through harder levels and likely quit. Players voted with their wallets, proving that Nintendo's accusations are at least exaggerated. Used console sales data speaks for itself. At least a quarter of used PlayStation, Xbox and Wii consoles sold on Allegro auctions were modified to enable cheat code applications, in brackets, run pirated versions of games. Ads placed by firms offering mounting and service for such extensions fill a couple of pages of search results. User declarations support this devastator. According to our results, 22.5% of players consider console modification, in brackets especially to be able to run pirate games, acceptable. Galoob. I've not read it myself, by the way, but if you're interested in this topic, Mia Consalvo has a book called Cheating, Gaining the Advantage in Video Games that I reckon would probably be a really great read. Ooh boy, that was a hell of a lore dump, eh? I reckon in the last 15 minutes or so I've achieved my all-time worst overly elaborate joke to talking like a human being ratio. I'm never getting this historical again. Now, I dislike history lessons as much as the next guy. I once got assigned homework to write a 2-page biography about Al Capone and handed in a paper about Al Pacino. But all this, I assure you, was very necessary. Now we have an understanding of the complexity of cheating in video games. And before I continue, I'd like to just say that I love you, Nintendo. I know that you almost definitely don't love me back based on some of the things I've said in this and prior videos, and we're almost definitely never going to work together, but just as long as you know that I love you. My adolescence would have been like 75% less groovy if you weren't around, and I still love you today. In other sports and games, cheating is comparatively pretty black and white. There's no universal rulebook on all card games, but I think it's fair to say that most of their developers don't intend for players to peek at each other's hands, stack the deck, or tamper with the rules around newbies, and those are things that will almost always have negative effects on other players. What if you're playing a board game and someone angrily just flips the board, misplacing all the pieces and ruining the integrity of the game? What if you're playing Jenga and some absolute pelican decides it'd be funny to just knock the whole thing down? I don't mean to sound presumptuous, but I think it's fair to say that if Cristiano Ronaldo walked onto the pitch with a pair of giant Spy Kids 3 mega legs, someone in the crowd at some point would eventually say something to the effect of, "That's a bit weird." Remember a long time ago when I said this video was going to get specific? Like, maybe too specific? Yeah, well, keep that in mind as I say the next words that are going to come out of my mouth and show the next image that's about to come up on screen. What is a video game? No, I'm serious. I'm dead serious. What is a video game? How would you define it? Or perhaps more specifically, what makes video games different from sports, board games, card games, or any other kind of traditional games? The answer is pretty obvious, right? It's in the name. Video games. We play them on screens. Perhaps another defining feature would be that we play them with controllers and we need some kind of central console, yeah? When I was a kid, Sky Broadband was our TV provider, and with the package we paid for came a bunch of interactive games you could just play on the TV. Battleships was one of them. When me and my mum played Battleships on our TV, were we playing a video game? That's okay, I'll wait. Wow, no one's gonna say anything, huh? That's really fucking rude. You could argue that the TV remote functioned as our controller, our Skybox was the console, we were playing it on a screen, so video game, right? I'm not going to give you my answer just yet, I want this to just be something you mull over. Here's another example. Disney's Seen It. This is a board game that comes with a DVD, it has tons of remastered clips of Disney films and it asks you questions based on them. Still needs a screen to be played, you're still using your remote as a controller, and your DVD player in this instance is serving the function of a console. So, is Disney's Seen It a video game? Okay, seriously, what the fuck? Keep in mind, we're heading out of facts and into opinion territory now, right? My answer might surprise you, but it's no. I don't think these things are video games. Interactive games is a name that could maybe work. Consider the term RPG, or role-playing game. If you take it at face value, it should apply to every game ever made. Not just video games, every game. In football, someone plays the role of the goalie, so is football an RPG? In Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, you're playing the role of Donkey Kong. Is Donkey Kong Jungle Beat an RPG? RPG is a pretty antiquated term at face value, but regardless of your opinion on it, we still use it. We just understand that if we're still going to use it, we need to separate the real RPGs from the games that would otherwise just so happen to fall into the incredibly wide and generous arms of the umbrella term. Now obviously, I don't think the term RPG is used particularly well today, but maybe it's impossible to. Maybe it's just too broad a term. I think perhaps the term video games may be becoming too broad as well. If you want to watch a video from an era in which my voice and editing were about 200% more insufferable, then I made a video late last year about Minecraft and the nature of games and how many games are actually games, and it gets about as ridiculous as it sounds. I'm not here to suggest a better name for video games or to suggest that calling things video games is bad. This is just some food for thought. But I think it's fair to say that when you think of video games, Sky TV's Battleships and Disney's Seen It are not exactly what come to mind. Much like how when you think of RPGs, football and Donkey Kong Jungle Beat aren't what come to mind. At least I really hope they aren't. You probably think of something quite different entirely. VR and Jackbox are two more great examples of how the medium is evolving and how our classic terminology might be slowly becoming less appropriate. My point here is, if you're thinking along the same lines as me, we need more specificity to really understand and define what a video game is. According to our modern understanding of video games, what is it that differentiates them not just from sports and board games and card games and whatnot, but what also differentiates the real video games from their closer relatives? Well, now comes the crux of this video. This is what it's all been leading up to. Keep in mind that at this point I'm trying to present an idea and an opinion, not a fact, and you're welcome to come to whatever conclusion you want. But if you ask me for another very specific defining feature that sets them apart from all other kinds of games, it would be cheating. In my opinion, video games are the only kinds of games in the world that can get more complex and interesting when you cheat. Or at least to a much more profound extent. Other sports and more traditional games have been born from bending the rules of ones that came before, but the cheating rarely, if ever, makes the game itself more interesting. The intrigue that follows is external, it's controversy surrounding the game. When it was discovered that former NBA referee Tim Donaghy had been intentionally blowing calls or making incorrect ones so that he could profit off of bets he'd been making on the matches he himself was officiating, it's fair to say that newspapers and the media were all over it, but it didn't create an entirely new subsection of print media like secrets in video games starting the cheat book craze. Maybe you should work on that, Tim. The people need jobs. To give more examples similar to the ones I brought up before, think about when you used to play tag at school, and despite the fact that you'd very clearly physically tagged him, little Lance wasn't having any of it. "I'm not it," he'd cry, lying straight to your face, ignoring the rules of the game entirely despite still wanting to be present for it. There's nothing complex or interesting about that, Lance, and employment is going to beat the piss out of you. We could sit here and go over all the specifics and logistics of how cheating, as it's defined by many, is so much more complicated in video games than it is in other games, but it should be plain to see from what we've discussed in this video. When it comes to games and the internet, there are three inevitabilities. 1. Games will always evolve and change with time as technology and society develop. Not just video games. 2. People will always cheat and look for new ways to cheat, because cheating is a complex thing. And 3. People will somehow still not get the joke in a Fudge's thesis video. Seriously guys, how fucking thick do I have to lay it on? As games change, so does cheating, but cheating has had a far more complex and interesting effect on video games than on anything else. Cheating is not inherently bad in video games, and I think that's part of what defines them. We've seen cheating make games more accessible and appealing, improve their shelf life, inspire game design, create budding developers, birth passionate communities, and make Skyrim seem good. How the fuck they manage that? But if you're not still convinced, then I've got one final example. See, there's this little thing you might have heard of called speedrunning.
Because this totally makes sense. So taking this bike, putting it in a very specific spot and building a ton of speed, I am able to build a bunch of speed, reapply it, and be able to get all the way over here to this part of the level.
Awesome job, Covert.
An entire subculture, a field of competition and recreation has been created around cheating and exploits. People hone their skills at cheating, and it's fucking awesome to watch. Much like some competitive games, it's practically turned cheating into a spectator sport. All year round, huge marathons are hosted with countless people performing runs of their games of choice for an audience. These marathons often raise huge amounts of money for charity in the process, even if some of them are a bit dubious. Look at Metroid. In its early days, it could be so obtuse, with players needing to blow up completely nondescript walls to advance. It's exactly the kind of game most people needed to look at walkthroughs to beat, so it's so fascinating to see how cheating has kind of recontextualized it, with Super Metroid basically becoming the face of AGDQ. Maybe you've heard the word bricolage before. It's a French term coined to mean construction or creation from a range of available things. It's effectively making art out of a bunch of pre-made resources. I'd argue that cheating is getting there. It's slowly but surely becoming an art form in video games, especially as far as modding is concerned. Modding, in my opinion, is an amazing example of bricolage. Some people might wonder if it's good to encourage cheating, as it's been known for so long as a purely negative thing, but our trusty essay comes through yet again. Research results do not confirm the hypothesis of negative influence of video games on standards of honesty at school or in college. Tendency to cheat is a personality trait or learned strategy applied in all domains of life. And then 2012. Players that cheat, i.e. avoid problems instead of solving them, are more likely to quit a challenge when they cannot overcome the problems that it brings, and also apply the same strategies in other domains of life. It appears that when they cheat at school or at work, in brackets avoid effort and obstacles, etc., also cheat in games, but games are not related to an increased tendency of cheating in real life. In short, cheat is gonna cheat. Games have got nothing to do with it. I guess what this video is trying to say, beyond presenting you with some interesting ideas, is that if for whatever reason you're still in the headspace that video games are some kind of lower medium, you need to wake up. Their place as art should be clear to see. The possibilities are endless, and we're watching the medium evolve in real time, and it's fascinating. If you still view them as lesser compared to other media, then you're on the wrong side of history, pal. Go work your cringe 9 to 5. I'll be here gaming. Hello, my high tier patrons are very nice and smart and attractive, and I hear they can all do backflips. Those people are Cheesy Chip, Mike Archer, Mike Craig, Captain L, Good Chicken, Chris Monk, Derek Drost, Flashing Fire, Bryce Stevens, Cousin Boneless, Tale of the Toaster, Waldington, Justin Mills, Heist Van Duren, Christ, I hope I said that right, and Garm. If you feel like similarly throwing some moolah my way, then you'll be able to read some of my inane Patreon exclusive lists and ramblings, and if you feel like throwing a bit more my way, then you can get your name in the video at the end too, and that's pretty neat. I am going to be issuing a pretty big channel update in the coming weeks, so if you're interested in the future of this channel, then I'd recommend watching that when it comes out so you can stay in the loop, because there's going to be some pretty important stuff talked about. I look forward to reading all of your comments, especially the ones about how I take too long to get to the point, so I can snarkily reply that you clicked on a half-an-hour YouTube video in the first place, bucko. I didn't exactly think time was of the essence, but if you really want, I could just talk like a robot the whole time and give you nothing but the facts. And then we'd both be having less fun. Huh. Maybe I don't look forward to reading them. Maybe I just won't. Maybe I'll make some waffles instead. Yeah, that sounds like a great idea.